G'day guys, welcome back to the Hobby Hatch. In this video, I'll be showing you how I turn some Warhammer parts and some putty into a man in a spiky suit, facing off against a giant Harvestman spider with massive lobster claws. We'll also show you how I crafted its nest using foam and hot glue, and how I gave it a paint job. So the first step with all Warhammer pieces is to go in and remove all the obvious Warhammer parts. I went in and removed the Aquila with sandpaper. I then went through another bits box and found a gun arm from a Vansar Ganger, and a pistol and an arm from an AdMech kill team, I believe, to act as the base for the model's arms and posing. I then also used a Vansar head, which I used to sculpt on a nice bulbous cranium to, just to give this piece a kind of bulky, rounded appearance. You can see I went for very round with the green stuff, and once that was all cured and all the armor pads and panels were in place, I started drilling holes using a Dremel carving bit, which would act as our anchor points for all of the spikes. So don't do what I did in this step. I added the spikes using brass rod, because I didn't have any ABS 1mm rods at the time, and God, I should have waited because it took ages, and there are still pieces of brass rod flinging around the room that I keep finding vacuuming up. It's horrible. So I use ABS rods for this. I then glued on the head to the body, and just like that, a minute 40 seconds in, we're up to painting. I spray primed it black with a rattle can outside, and then this time we're going to be using an underpainting technique that I've seen. I want to give a try. It's, in essence, you're painting a kind of mother color underneath the model, which you're then going to paint over the top of. So for this, I wanted a red color for all of the parts, so I painted it red and brown from different angles. I then went in with a nice pale green, which I layered up very thin layers over the top, all the way up into a pale green highlight. I then did the same thing, but with grays for all the metal parts. I then went in with some inks, just to paint a very simple glow to his backpack. I'm kind of seeing this backpack as a power unit. It's kind of always running such a big, hulking piece of armor. It's going to be pumping out energy of some kind out in the wasteland. And with that done, he is complete. It's my first attempt at doing a kind of underpainted style. It's nice to see that red is retained all the way through to the end of the paint job. I then got started on sculpting the Harvestman. So Harvestman spiders are like daddy longlegs spiders. It's another name for them. They're not actually spiders technically. They are arachnids, but they're spiders in the same way that a scorpion's a spider. They actually have 2 eyes. They don't have the 8 eyes. They do have 8 legs. They're very spindly 8 legs, and a lot of the species actually have lobster claws. They have males that will fight each other for females, presumably in territory, and they use these big lobster claws. I then painted this one the same as the spike suit with a red undercolor, glazing up and layering on grays all the way up until pale blues. I did give this one a quick wash with Agrax Earthshade as well, just to get all the recesses a bit darker. Makes it look a little bit grungier, like it's an animal living in a nest or a hole in the ground, rather than something a bit cleaner. Here I glazed in those brighter grays and blues all the way up until quite a bright blue highlight. So I don't really know what to say while I'm doing the painting over this, but let's do some facts about the Harvestman spider. So Harvestman spiders are actually not true spiders. They are arachnids, but they lack venom glands and don't spin webs. Okay, well that's interesting. I should have probably looked that up before I made its nest have a bunch of webs all over it. Anyway, the Harvestmen in this universe, they spin webs. All right. So if a leg is grabbed, they can actually detach it, although it doesn't grow back like a lizard's tail grows back. That's kind of sad for them, I guess. And turns out they're actually older than the dinosaurs. Their lineage has been around for 400 million years. That's crazy. That is crazy. They eat dead insects, plant material, fungi, and even bird droppings. And in this case, in this universe, they eat humans, which is why our spiked hero, in this case, is going in to get rid of this one. So those big claws that you see on Harvestman spiders, they're actually called chelicerae, if you're to believe Google, and they are mouth parts. On some species, though, they are enlarged and used in mating rituals or to defend and fight off other males. Very interesting. Harvestman spiders, not actual spiders, everyone. Keep that in mind next time you see a day long-legged spider. They're more interesting than you think. Alright, enough of that. I then moved on to building the terrain. I used just foam offcuts. I was really scraping the bottom of the barrel here. I'm kind of out of foam. I've got some packing foam. You can see the polystyrene, expanded polystyrene at the bottom. It's really not good to cut, so I've kind of just got it to a shape that I like, and I've just left it alone. The XPS foam, however, is pretty good to cut. You can do it with a knife. It doesn't make that much of a mess, and so that's exactly what I did. I then marked a hole for where I wanted the Harvestman to be coming out of, and using a hobby knife, I cut into it, and using some tweezers, I removed all of the excess. Alright, so we've skipped ahead a little bit. I actually used a butane torch to kind of oval out and smooth out the edges. I did do it in a nice ventilated area. Those fumes are not to be breathed in, but it did give me a much nicer shape. I also added a plasticard border around the outside, which will act as a barrier and kind of a bowl for the texture paint that we'll put in. So I scraped in the texture paint, painted it in with a old paintbrush. It's just a cheap one. Doing this sort of thing to a paintbrush will eventually ruin your brushes. All that grit gets down to the ferrule, like the metal part at the just below the bristles, and it'll just ruin it. So just keep that in mind. Use an old brush if you're going to be painting on this sort of stuff. But anyway, I painted it all in and pushed it so it was flush up against the plasticard walls. And then after it dried just a little bit, I went in with a wet brush and evened out the texture just a little bit. Then I wanted the bug nest to have these gross looking ribs, and so using a hot glue gun, I just ran beads all the way up and along and over each other, creating kind of like this splayed out rib effect, kind of like what you'd see in like Aliens. That was the kind of inspiration for this. Then, before I realized that Harvestmen don't create silk, I thought it'd be cool to put some webs around this hole. And so I did that with Uhu glue. I think it turns out pretty cool. The canon event now is that Harvestmen in this universe, they do actually spin webs. I then primed and got it ready for painting. I painted it the exact same way as the other things, putting the red layer down first to act as the mother color to kind of tint the entire scene in a nice warm tone. You can see it kind of looks a bit fleshy here. Could have probably left it if it was a Mars scene, but nope. Ground needs a little bit of brown. So we went in with a nice light browny tone, which I spread out pretty much over every surface. I did leave a few little areas a bit darker just for some variation. We are going to go over this in a wash in the end and dry brushing, so it's kind of going to filter them out and smooth out all of the edges and barriers and transition points between colors. I then went in and did a much brighter color to act as a highlight just on raised edges and from the direction I wanted the light to be coming in from. And then, as I said before, we dry brushed over the top just to smoothen out some of the transitions and pick up some of the higher points. I then went in and painted all of the ribs an off-white kind of pale, sickly skin tone color, very thin. And then I went in with a green contrast paint just to add a bit more vibrancy to the color. I will be painting over this with the off-white color again in the future, but I wanted there to be a nice underlaid tone of green, something just to break up the browns and the kind of lighter tones. In the same way, just to add a bit more color vibrancy, I added a purple contrast, and I kind of selectively dabbed this into darker spots. And with that dry, I went back over all of the ribs with a much thinner coat of the pale off-white, and it gave quite a nice, transparent, sickly, skin tony kind of effect, which worked out quite nice. This was then, of course, highlighted from a top right directional to match the rest of the scene. After that, I went in with a gloss varnish just to reinforce that these are biological in nature, kind of sickly, silky, come out of a monster sort of thing, before going in with a red burnt sienna oil wash, which I sloshed pretty much all over the diorama. Once again, kind of pulling it back towards that red mother color look, but also picking up a lot more of the details in the recesses. As you can see, once that had dried, it brought back a lot of the nice warmer, reddier tones. It's mostly dry. You can see in the hole it's still a little bit wet in there, but we can see it's pulled in a lot of the recesses and given us some nice contrast. Then I went in and I glued the Harvestman inside his home, and our spiked suit hero, or exterminator, to the leftmost point. I was going to put him in the middle, but it was a bit too tight in the diorama, so I put him off to the side. I then went in with some pigment powders. I think I might have overdone it just a little bit with the pigment powders. I did lose a lot of that nice color, kind of slopped it all over the surface, but I'll let you be the judge. Did the pigments ruin the terrain a little bit? Maybe. I think it is important to pop them on though, just maybe a bit less than I did here. And with all that done, all that was left to do was paint the rim black, and it was on to the Glamour Shots.
Stay calm. Stay calm. Stay calm.
Thanks for watching, everyone. If you liked the build, or you learnt a fun new fact about the lesser-known arachnid family Harvestman, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more. Can't promise there'll be any more arachnid-based facts in future videos, but there definitely will be builds, and you can keep up to date with those over on my Instagram. The link will be in the description below. If you have any comments, suggestions, or feedback for me, please leave them in the comment section. I try to get back to each and every one of them. As always, if you're in the mood for some more Hobby Hatch content, consider checking out some of these videos. YouTube assures me they are specifically the best ones for you. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.